Welcome to the second episode of the Galileo podcast with James and
Q.
Thank you. See, it's a bit more excited this time. We are here recording our second episode on Good Friday because what else do you do on a good long weekend except try and get more work done? And we're excited to jump through a few different things. So today we're going to cover some news. Of course, we're going to jump into GPT-4 and AI in a section that I'm calling AI Taking Over the World. Non-controversial name, I'm sure. And then we're going to dive into a couple of news items, talk about some early stage funding news, and then we're going to do Roast My Deck. So we've had a few people submit various pitch decks. We've picked two, and we'll get into that, and we'll finish off with a couple of founder questions. So we'll dive straight into it. Before we get going, after our last episode, we had some fantastic feedback. So thanks to everyone who's listened and who provided comments. Not only do we get feedback, we also got a very cool AI-generated rap song. Are you excited to hear this, Hugh?
Oh, no.
It's very short. So I will start the rap song.
Galileo Ventures making the world turn, investing and start just giving them the burn. Funds for the future to brighten the way. All the best minds come out and play.
That was awful.
It was generated by AI, Hugh.
Yeah, but like, I mean, this is where it's sort of like, look, like, I mean, I guess I get the piece of, you know, what about something that's longer than 13 seconds and it's more work and all that sort of stuff. But like, there's just, like, for that, you could just pay someone on Fiverr and you'd get a vastly better outcome. Probably not a dissimilar turnaround time. Like, I reckon it wouldn't take that much longer in terms of turnaround time.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I think what I find interesting about that generated sound, and by the way, for the next episode, I'm going to make a theme song with AI for the Ventures podcast. So, you know, stay tuned. I think about what I found a bit interesting. So this is from Beatbot.fm, which is basically an Aussie startup venture studio. It does a lot of AI stuff for the last 5 years. What I find interesting about this one is they've done the vocals pretty well, synthesized vocals pretty well. The background, like, instruments are a bit hazy, but that's because the fidelity is not quite there. And it's obviously very short, so they don't have to do too much compute time. I'm yet to play around with some of the text to music stuff, but some of the very early examples is interesting. But we're going to talk about that in a second. So thanks very much for people that send that through. I am now going to jump into the news. So we're going to kick it off. We're going to, in our new section called AI Taking Over the World.
Right. We have sections now.
We do. The first one off the ranks is obviously, since we last spoke, which is about a month ago, GPT-4 was released, which has taken the world by storm. Specifically, it has definitely given a boost to all the TikTokers I follow that doom, saying AI doomers. I'll call them AI doomers. I like that expression. They've definitely got a huge boost. And obviously, we've had very interesting things like the plugin got announced, so you can add different apps. You've had our first examples of people trying to connect apps. We've had some interesting AI scripts come in. And as a result of all this, we had an open letter come out in which a group of AI scientists, well, I wouldn't call them AI scientists, a group of scientists and researchers and hanger-oners, I'll call, have basically said we should pause training the model for 6 months. What is your view on this, Hugh?
I mean, okay, so a couple of pieces here. Piece one is like the whole GPT-4 thing. I'm like, yeah, sure, it's cool. And I appreciate that, you know, each iteration is a major iteration and functionality goes out and up and capability goes up and all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, like this, you know, this is going to happen iteratively, you know, for the rest of our time with AI, right? You know, as time goes on, there'll be better and better models and they'll be better trained and they'll have better results. And so I'm a little bit less excited, I guess, about the like, yay, it's out. Like, it's like, okay, cool. Like the next iteration's here. Sweet. I think in terms of the like, I mean, I'm not necessarily you can't put the genie back in the box kind of person, which I think has been some of the response to the whole letter of let's all just stop AI development. And because I think that there's probably a little bit of truth in that. But I think at the same time, like, you know, there is a question here around how you deal with morals and ethics in generative AI models and what that means and all this stuff. I think the part that isn't really being considered is that in many cases, a lot of this was already being done, and it may not have been being done and to the degree of being, I guess, consumerized or provided to an everyday consumer. But I have zero doubt that in the innards of, well, there's obviously a lot of research institutions, but in the innards of some of our very, very, very large global tech companies, a lot of this work was already getting done and used for various purposes and had a very different degree of, I guess we'll call it moral and ethical oversight.
Yep.
And so I have no doubt that it's been, like, and again, I appreciate the technology is getting better and all kind of thing, but like, I think there's a piece here of where, in some ways, from that sort of transparency perspective, these things being done, or even potentially forcibly being done in the open or in public, is probably a net benefit or net gain utility, because then at least there's some degree of oversight compared to the things that happen behind closed doors.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you. I think we're both squarely at the camp of there's no point in pausing training a model. That's not going to be the thing that changes the direction. I think I somewhat empathize with the view around what does this mean for my job, which I think there's a lot of scared people who are concerned about that. But at the same time,
I think that's not a reason to be like, oh, let's stop developing.
Exactly.
Okay, let's stop developing computers because punch card operators are going to lose their job.
Exactly. I think it's a weak form of like rent seeking, right? Which is like, well, wait a second, my job might disappear. I don't think that's gonna. I think it's gonna change. Also, based on how my observations of 10 years in tech, introducing a new technology doesn't immediately change someone's job prospects like straight away. There's actually a bit more of a long tail for things.
I also think that the reality is, like, there's a degree of, in the modern age, it's much harder to just have one job forever. And, sure, there's probably cases of, I don't know, manufacturing assembly line or something like that where people might have those sort of risks. But I think most sort of, I guess, certainly in like professional knowledge work, for example, like there's an expectation that you're going to end up over your career, your entire job and your life cycle is probably going to change because new technology comes out, new approaches come out. Like, I think in a lot of cases, that's always been the expectation. So, I don't really know why there's this weird, like, and again, it's not a reason. It's like the worst reason to claim that you should be stopping development.
But it has repeated in history before, in other technological advances, which I do find interesting because that's a strong signal that there is consensus that this new type of, I'll call it new type of AI, but essentially large language models, has somehow captured the zeitgeist of intelligent AI in the everyday person.
Yeah. And I mean, we've sort of, I guess we've also seen, I think at the same time, we've also seen it with like deep fakes and things like that becoming easier and, more capable of being able to be deployed. Those kind of things I think are starting to really get into people's minds and have them be able to wonder, what does this really mean for society? And I think there is a lot of really interesting sort of ethical and moral questions that are going to need to be explored. Yep. How much of that should be regulated? How much of that should be a global regulation versus a global approach, I guess, compared to a much more localized regional approach? I don't know.
Who knows? I think it's way too early too. What I do know is that, and this is something I'll happily stand by, is that OpenAI's GPT-4 will not escape the confounds of GPT-4 and come into your house and kill you, as much as some of my videos I've seen have suggested.
I'd worry much more about Boston Dynamics than I would about GPT-4.
I love Boston Dynamics, but that's a whole other section that we don't need to get into right now. I call them my robot overlords, future robot overlords, and I usually every year I tweet a video of how they're progressing, and year on year it gets insanely better.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality. Is like you look at a lot of this, fear about LLMs and everything else. And you're sort of like, think about the defense applications, and then think about the fact that in defense they were probably doing all of this, like 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
So speaking of doing it 3 years ago, the inside word I have is Google Bard has been also co-developing a large language model alongside OpenAI for about the same amount of time. I mean, there were very similar researchers that came and co between both groups. A lot of them have now left to go into work at OpenAI over the last 3 years. Regardless, why is Google still so underwhelming? What's your view on that, Hugh?
Look, I don't know if it's necessarily that it's underwhelming. I think it's more the piece of where, like, Google missed the early mover advantage here. I think everyone can agree with that. They missed the early mover advantage. I think in terms of the data that they have and the corpus that they have and everything else, we can probably pretty much everyone can agree that like it's probably one of the best places to have all this data. Like it's quite hard to build a thing to be able to crawl the internet, let alone do it, for such a long time over such a long period. And so I think they've got the data. I have no doubt that they have sufficiently smart software engineers and AI engineers at Google. Like I have zero doubts whatsoever. I think the thing that really holds them back is that it is that challenge of OpenAI, I think, can push the envelope more because they have less of that sort of, I guess, corporate organizational legacy pieces of going, what happens when a regulator in Italy decides to try and stomp on us? What does that mean? And the, regulatory affairs manager, because I'm sure they've got one in 50,000 different countries at Google, then says, we can't do this and we need to add this to the specification. And I think they have a lot of those restrictions that come as a result of being a big, giant company corporate that you don't see from like an OpenAI type model, because they're doing the sort of startup, shoot from the hip, move fast, break things kind of model. And so I think that's really what's been holding them back. I don't think it's a technical challenge. I don't think it's a people challenge. I think it's probably just like organizational culture and organizational approach is very different when you're a company of that size, even though technically you should be able to produce a better product.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the nice things about being in tech is obviously I've got a lot of friends who are Google, ex-Google, and have met a lot of people currently in Google working on aspects of their AI efforts, which is vast and varied. Bard is only one of them. I think one of the things I'd encourage the listeners to look into is the Google Palm language model, which is a multimodal language model. So what we're starting to see is the split between text only, which is essentially what GPT-4 is, language, to multiple inputs, and how that can increase general intelligence of a model or not. Google is actually quite far ahead in this, and they're not releasing a lot of this publicly in terms of you being able to interface with it in any sort of real deep way. But one of the interesting demos they've shown is be able to apply a language model to a computer robot in different types of robot, and then that robot to instantly able to learn these tasks because of a generalized model, which is multimodal, which I find really interesting. I think Google's holding a lot back. I'm not going to call the whole OpenAI will kill Google thesis at all is fulfilled, and I think Sam Altman of OpenAI also agrees on this matter. So I think the race is still very much on. But as one of my researcher friends told me yesterday when I was having a conversation with him about this, it's very interesting because Google's almost like the chef that has all the ingredients in the kitchen, but has monumentally screwed it up.
Yeah. I mean, for all we know, they will come out and suddenly everything will be amazing. But I just think it's like, I think Google doesn't really have an incentive to build ChatGPT is ultimately kind of a plaything, right? Yeah. And Google doesn't really have an incentive to build a consumer-facing plaything.
Yeah, that's right.
I think the question I would have is, what happens when we start actually seeing the use cases for this that are organizationally driven, not necessarily API driven in the way that you can obviously add functionality to an application using OpenAI's APIs currently. When we start seeing the organizational approaches to these sort of things, that's when I sort of go, okay, well, that's probably when if I was someone like Google, I'm going to step in and go, oh, okay, you've built this thing. People are actually finding it useful. Great. Here's one that's 10 times better.
Yeah, 100%. I also wonder, and this is what it's been hinted to be by people inside Google, which is Bard is already being used in a lot of ways, but you can't see it. It's not exposed publicly. You can't interact with it. And one of the questions I really wonder, and I don't know if anyone's looked into this, is in what way has large language models already been used in Google and we're already been exposed to it in terms of the results, but we don't actually know?
Yeah. And I think that's where it's sort of like, from my perspective, I think surely, maybe, I don't obviously know with any degree of confidence, but surely the answer for that is a lot. Like,
yes, correct. So if you look at the cards have gotten significantly better over the last few years. So when I'm talking about when you Google search, it comes up with knowledge cards. The first box of those were like official things that were very large, like presidents and things that were common in church, and they got manually checked. Now, if you look at it and you search a recipe, it's getting down to the point where you can tick different ingredients and then it will show different results. And I think one of the things I do appreciate with Google is that as a search company, if they give you the wrong results, it's extremely bad. Whereas for Bing, they couldn't care less, and that's when you had Sydney start to threaten journalists and stuff, which is
but I mean,
lots of fun.
All of those sort of
Again, that's like if you direct the AI to say bad things, it will say bad things. So I think I agree with you. It's kind of not really a valid, I guess, criticism. But at the same time, I think for Google, they definitely feel the whole presenting wrong search results is a bad thing. I want to jump into a little bit of our evolving thesis here on how we're kind of viewing AI here. Obviously, I would say I'm generally the more optimistic one. You're the more pessimistic one. And one of the things you tweeted earlier this week was this idea of the grifter industrial complex.
Yeah.
Can you explain what you mean by that? And can you explain how is it being applied in this AI revolution or AI iteration, however you might want to call it?
Look, one of the things that I've found incredibly painful, like deeply, deeply, deeply painful, is the way in which, it's just watching that process of the people who jump from one thing that's popular to the next, and they always have like futurist in their LinkedIn bio and like all that sort of stuff, and it's like suddenly it's like, you know, they go from being experts in, you know, blockchain to this to that, and so now they're all AI experts, and I'm like, no, like there is science here, right? There is actual science here, and it's like I get the piece of you can walk around and go, oh, you know, have you seen ChatGPT? Here's some interesting things that I've found. Like, look, I've viewed Product Hunt. You know, oh wow, look at all these things that are like. I get that you can do that, and some people find you very smart as a result. But I do not find you very smart. I find you to be a total grifter because you don't understand anything about any of the things that you're talking about at all. You're just like doing it to try and grift a few more dollars out of conference organizers and event managers to be able to then, like, you know, jump on today's gravy train.
Speaking of which, please like and subscribe to our new Patreon for Galileo Ventures.
So if they had a Patreon, I'd be quite happy. But it's like, they're all the people that are like, oh, I'm a keynote speaker and I charge $15,000 to tell you, even though I have zero background in all. Like, you see it all the time in, you see it frequently as well in startups, where you see these people who are I'm a startup expert industry speaker, you know, book me for your event.
Yeah.
And they haven't done anything.
No, they haven't. They haven't built anything. They don't know anything. You know, actually, the phrase I was asked is like, how many of you have actually ever trained a deep learning model?
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because, you know, there's a whole principle in like within sort of like the EO and YPO world of like, you don't share advice, you only share experiences. And so you can only actually talk about things that you have personal and direct experience with. Yeah. You don't talk about things in the sense of like, oh, like, you know, here's this thing that I think you should do. And I think that sort of approach is often really, really missing from these kind of spaces, because it's like there can be a really interesting space of saying, oh, like, you know, here's how I have applied ChatGPT into my workplace and my workforce or my startup or whatever it is. Like, here's what we've done. Here's how we approached it. Here are the results that we saw, all that kind of stuff. Great. Love being people sharing that. But the pieces of like, imagine you could, you know, you should do this and you should do this and your whole business is going to change. Like, it's just.
So I somewhat lament and agree and empathize with your perspective. I do find it quite hilarious how these people do jump from topic to topic to build up subscribers and stuff. And, you know, I think there's always going to be, I'll call it tech influences, although that's really weird to think about, but that's actually what's happening now. I guess one of the theses I'm evolving here is really on what exactly is happening with the language model behavior that we're seeing. And one of the things I do strongly believe in, and I'll happily put my flag in the ground and see what happens as a prediction. I actually think what we've discovered here is a new way of how the brain works. And what I mean by that is the emergent behaviors in language models as we add more data is proving out to show very similar types of intelligence, right, that we consider to be intelligent. And I think that's because we're learning something new about neural networks, where there was already in science and neuroscience, there was already some correlation between the two, and neural nets in your brain and how much of that is true in terms of how the brain functions is I think starting to prove out a little bit. I highly recommend everyone to read the paper from OpenAI on emergent behaviors. So they have a paper called Sparks of Artificial General Intelligence. For those that aren't familiar with the podcast, AGI, or Artificial General Intelligence, is kind of like the end result of all this AI research. The idea that you have a human-like intelligent thing that is probably going to be more intelligent than humans in some forms. And I think that's really interesting. Just to quote a couple of things for the paper. So the paper goes through hundreds of examples of GPT-4 doing very generalized tasks, from creating music notation, creating 3D world models, maths proofs, actually maths proofs in forms of Shakespeare is my favorite part, so definitely look at that. And then coding, right? And the overall summary, right, I'm just going to pick out a couple of quotes here, is it exhibits emerging behaviors and capabilities where the mechanisms at this moment are hard to discern precisely. This is from the mouth of the own researchers, which I agree, we were surprised. But, and this is really important, it can't learn quickly and learn from experience, a very important part from intelligence, which is humans, obviously. And the model is not continuously updating, and this overall patterns of intelligence are decidedly non-human-like, right? And so that's very important to keep in mind, because I think people are ignoring this aspect. The central work and claim is that the GPT-4 has some version of general intelligence. I don't know if I agree with that, but I think there's definitely sparks of it. It doesn't show some versions of this. And this is demonstrated by the capabilities of reasoning, creativity, and deduction, which you can see in some of the proofs. Now, is this intelligence? Is this pattern recognition? Is there some version of probability pattern that's being regurgitated back to you? Does that matter? That's the interesting part. A lot of it, but there's a lot more to be done, and there's going to be a lot more research coming out in the next 12 months for sure. So I do believe there is some new discovery being made here about how intelligence or how forms of intelligence happens, and we'll see how that plays out. What I do find really interesting is an interview as well with the co-founder of OpenAI and GPT. So this is actually one of the engineers who's involved in the model. And I'm going to show you the video.
I'll give you an example, a recent example, which I think is really telling and fascinating. So we've all heard of Sydney, Bing's alter ego. And I've seen this really interesting interaction with Sydney, where Sydney became combative and aggressive when the user told it that it thinks that Google is a better search engine than Bing. Now, how can we, what is a good way to think about this phenomenon? What's a good language? What does it mean? You can say, well, it's just predicting what people would do, and people would do this, which is true. But maybe we're now reaching a point where the language of psychology is starting to be appropriate to understand the behavior of these neural networks. Now, let's talk about the limitations. It is indeed the case that these neural networks they do have a tendency to hallucinate. But that's because a language model is great for learning about the world, but it is a little bit less great for producing good outputs. There are technical reasons why a language model is much better at learning about the world, learning incredible representations of ideas, of concepts, of people, of processes that exist. But its outputs aren't quite as good as one would hope, or rather as good as they could be.
So I'm just going to play that little part, and I highly recommend you listen to the whole interview. This is obviously from an engineer who's at the core of creating these new type of neural network models, large language models. And it's fascinating to kind of get his view. He's obviously very optimistic about the extent of how these models will evolve. There are other people that are far more pessimistic about how much better they'll become, but nonetheless, very interesting. Hugh, what's your view on the notion that we have perhaps language models are some forms of general intelligence? Do you agree with that, or do you think they're not?
I disagree with that. I think there's a piece of where, my version of what people call I love that we've sort of coined it as hallucinations.
Yes, that is, yeah.
I actually use the phrase that these models are just confidently wrong. And so then it becomes this challenge of the really hard part is being able to, I guess, bullshit detect between when something is confidently wrong versus confidently right, and it's confident all the time. It's very hard to be able to work out, what is actually real and what is not. So, do I think that this is all driven off some sort of AGI type mood? I'm like, I don't know. I don't really subscribe to that model. And I think that's because I think it's because in my head, we're still at that stage where AI is to a degree a black box, but it's not a pure black box, black hole yet, right? We still kind of know how LLMs work. We understand that it's based on tokenization and probability and all sorts of stuff, and we can tune it so that we can talk about randomness and variability within those models. And I think the point at which I would start going, oh yeah, this is, starting to probably show some real signs of AGI or whatever, is when it's you're dealing in these situations, people start going, yeah, I did all this stuff, but I can't tell you how the box works.
Sure.
When the experts say to me, I don't know how this box works. This is a mysterious box that I do not understand in the slightest, and I can't understand it, and I can't unpack it, and I can't work out what it is about this box that makes it work this way, is when I think we'll start actually seeing those kinds of things. Because I think while we can still confidently wrap our heads around exactly how these things are working and thinking and all that sort of stuff, I think it's very hard to argue that it's some sort of AGI as compared to saying, hey, look, at a very, very large scale, a probability model works well.
Yeah. I would note that in the paper, they use a definition of intelligence from 1994, which a bunch of AI researchers keep referring to. Is that correct? Who knows? Does anyone agree that's intelligence, the definition of intelligence? No. Do we have a definition for intelligence?
Yeah, there's no universal definition of this.
So I think there's a problem right there because right now we have actually no benchmark to go off necessarily other than observing humans.
Interacting with the Google search box probably is more intelligent than some people, right? Because intelligence is there are very, very, very intelligent people and there are less intelligent people, right? So simply having autocomplete in a search box in many ways is going to be more intelligent than some people. And so, pick your definition of intelligence and you'll be able to say a calculator is more intelligent than some people.
That's a good question. If I could go back in time to 1600 and show them Google search, would they think that is some sort of...
Even show them a screen, it would be enough. But
All right, let's move on. I'm going to move on to some news that got some attention recently. Last week, an Australian alternative protein, or I should say lab-grown meat company, not alternative protein, called Vow, released a mammoth meatball. And essentially what they do is they use a cell line from a woolly mammoth, yes, the ones from that extinct, and they created meatballs. It was very interesting because it captured global attention. So it's a bit of a marketing stunt.
Massive marketing stunt.
Massive marketing stunt. I'm going to play the video from Colbert and we're going to have a quick chat about it. So I'm just going to bring that up now.
That is so important, so dare I say, juicy, that we give that story its own meanwhile subsegment, Meatwhile. Meatwhile. Hold on to your tenderloin because a synthetic meat company has just created a meatball from the long extinct mammoth. To which dads everywhere said, it's fine, the extinction date is just a suggestion. The reanimated meatwad is part of a project that aims to mix and match cells from unconventional species to create new kinds of meat. There's already an experimental food institute doing that. They're called Taco Bell. All right? Groundbreaking work. Live Más isn't a slogan. It's a challenge.
All right, Hugh. What's your take on the mammoth meatball from Val and in particular, lab-grown meat?
I mean, look, great stunt.
Totally agree.
Great stunt. A+. PR, whoever the PR person / agency that came up with it. Great work. Good work. A+. Take your prize. I don't know. Look, for me, lab-grown meat has just always been, I don't know. I don't get excited by it. And I think, obviously I'm not a vegetarian or anything like that. And I appreciate the, I guess, theory is probably the wrong word, but I guess I appreciate the rhetoric around it being, well, hey, like, is there sustainability in continuing to eat meat and everything else? But I guess I kind of like, I don't know, like, if I wasn't going to eat meat, I would just not eat meat.
So,
and like, it's that interesting piece of where I'm still not sure exactly who the market truly is for it, knowing that, like, for most sort of vegan, vegetarian type people that I know, that they don't want things that taste like meat all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
It's an interesting question. I think so. For those that aren't familiar with Val's Australia is essentially lab-grown meat company. There's probably a group of about 5 of them globally that have raised tens or hundreds of millions, in a couple of cases billions. And really, the problem with it is you've got to grow these cell lines in bioreactors. It's extremely expensive. I had the pleasure of seeing George, who's the CEO, founder of Val, chat earlier this week, actually. And they're targeting somewhere between 100, I believe, from memory, $100 to $120 per kilogram of this meat, right? So extremely expensive. And they're betting that bringing cell lines of things that we don't know what it tastes like because we have no experience will somehow create new behavior. I'm not sure I buy that thesis. I think it's going to be very hard to create the texture of meat. And as you said, in some ways, if you don't want to eat meat, just don't eat meat. But at the same time, I think the goal is very, I guess, worthy, which is, mitigating climate change and helping reduce animal cruelty and reliance on animals. I think down the line, I fully suspect we'll end up in this place because it doesn't really make sense to be killing billions of animals every year if we don't need to. But at the same time, we'll be interested to see where exactly this market forms. It's way too early. There's been a lot of hype, but now we're into the part where I think there's a group of companies that are doing interesting things because no one's talking about it anymore. That means we're actually making progress now.
I think that the other piece I would say is, like, a lot of it is if you sort of look at that sort of, I guess, what's the word? Like the gastronomy, science chef.
Yes, I know what you're right. Yeah.
The Heston Blumenthal type people.
Yeah.
Like, the whole thing of, let's combine these strange things and pea proteins and stuff like that in something that looks or feels like meat. It's kind of been a thing for a while. It's lived in that area of novelty. Yeah. Like, not far from where I live is like this restaurant that is somewhat famously is a vegan restaurant, but all of the like foods on the menu and everything else are all meat, right? Yeah. So it's like, everything is, the fried chicken or whatever it is, and it's actually all, various different
analogs, protein analogs. Yeah.
And it's novel, but I've been there twice.
Yeah, it's like mass market adoption.
It's a novel thing to go to, and you can go, oh, isn't this interesting? Isn't it fun how this, this is kind of like roast beef or whatever, like, and you're like, great. And then, like, you don't go back there the next weekend because you're like, oh, I really want to have some more pea protein fake roast beef. You're like, oh, the pub has a like roast beef special on Sunday. Great, let's go roast beef at the pub.
Yeah, so they talk about that and so George talked about this on the talk, and I find it really interesting. It's actually a really interesting aspect of the whole market, which is if you talk to the top researchers about why we find meat so satisfying, the answer is no one knows.
Yeah, it's definitely
it's complex.
Yeah,
because it's not just the sensation, which a lot of people go off straight away. It's how you feel within the hour or two after eating, and it's decidedly different to eating an analog. And so there's a very interesting aspect to that. And the question mark is, will lab-grown meat also have the same feel or have a different feel? And that might change the whole argument again. So we'll see. Watch this space. Very interesting. Have a look into Val if you're interested in following along their progress as an Aussie company going global in that aspect. So we're going to dive into quickly, just mention some early stage funding news, and then we're going to go into our new section, Rest on Deck. Early stage funding news for us this time is on Australia, because why wouldn't it be on Australia? In particular, there was only $661 million funded into companies in the first quarter of 2023 in Australia. That's across 82 deals. It is far less than last year. And of course, even less than 2021, where it was crazy. In fact, I'll go down to the graph here. I guess off the back of that, Hugh, there's a lot of questions from founders around, is it a terrible time to raise money? Is the capital markets dying? Are VCs no longer writing checks and everything's taking too long to close? I thought maybe we just cut through the noise. We're going to talk about it from an early stage perspective. What is your view on the funding market right now, given that overall it is down from the last 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a few pieces here. One piece here is I wonder how much of this is also in lockstep or proportional, the change in proportion to things like engineer salaries. So a lot of the largest costs of most startups, most technology startups, is engineer salary. And there was a period where engineer salaries went bloody crazy. Went absolutely off the rocker, crazy, wild, insane. And look, what if I was a software engineer? It would have been an amazing time. Whereas now, as a result of layoffs and stuff like that, it's kind of like the supply-demand curve has shifted a little bit. And as a result, I think we've seen them come down to some degree. And so, the what you can get in terms of headcount and people, which is obviously the biggest cost of most startups, is now, you can get the same thing for a lower price now than you did, 2 years ago because of the different, and obviously there's multiple things together, and we've got interest rate phenomenon, the ZERP, as people call it. We've got interest rates and things like that also sort of cross-sect all of that. But at the same time, I think there's a reality here of saying that, good companies still get funded. There was probably a period in the last couple of years where, a lot of bad companies got funded, or a lot of companies that were not actually good got funded. And as a result, I think a lot of those will die. And, should they have been funded in the first place? Maybe, maybe not, but the reality is, when there's lots of money around, more bad ideas get funded.
Yeah. Capital's cheap.
Because, capital's cheap, as you say. And so I think that's not to say that people who don't raise money now aren't good or whatever it is. But as a result, I think people have returned to some degree, and I was talking to some founders last night about this. People, I think, of VCs as a sector, I guess, have returned somewhat back towards things like, hey, cash flow is important, because we are in an environment now where it's not, it's not certain that even if you get pretty crappy progress, you're going to be able to confidently raise the next round. If you get great progress, you'll be able to raise the next round. It's the same as, it was 2 years ago. But if you get average progress or bad progress, you might not be able to now. And so that changes the way that you want to be able to try and recommend to your companies you deal with capital deployment and, how you manage your runway, how you do those things. And I think a lot of those things, kind of are lost a little bit in this whole piece of, there's less money around. I'm like, yeah, well, sure. There'll be times when VCs write more checks, there'll be times when VCs write less checks.
Yeah, I agree. I would say, and I guess this is from the perspective of for founders, I have a couple of things. So we're seeing valuations come down year on year. If you have a look at the report, so it's from Cut Through Venture, links in the show notes, we're seeing that across the board. The steepest declines, however, are in growth deals. So we're talking about things over 50 million. But what we're seeing, our experience at pre-seed and seed, is there's still a lot of appetite. I don't think valuations have noticeably fallen at seed if you're a good company and you've got good core metrics. If anything, I'm starting to see larger rounds at seed because bigger investors are coming down earlier and they need to deploy more money from the get-go, and they want to get larger ownership amounts than previously because they're worried about dilution further down the track. So what I think, and my advice to founders, is have 2 targets in round for your next round. One target where it's the best case, the second target where you don't have as much interest as you want. And the other aspect would be then to find a lead investor as fast as possible, because what we're seeing right now, when you're in a risk-off environment where people don't want to take as much risk, is obviously less people want to lead investment rounds. They prefer to follow someone. So find someone who can lead an investment round. And then the third aspect is, if a venture fund isn't interested or you can't get VC funds interested, find strategic angels that signals to the market you're a serious company and you know what you're doing in your space, right? So people that have background in your sector, or people that have founded companies in your sector before, that can vouch for your direction and your strategy. That helps a lot. So that's kind of my general gist in that space. But I would say VCs are still investing. There is a whopping amount of dry powder that is money yet to be invested globally in venture capital. We have to invest this money and things will get funded. And I think while the bar might be higher in terms of cash flow, in terms of revenue, in terms of sales, things will still get funded. So founders, I think it's still a great time.
Well,
to
and,
be going
and
out
one of the tricky things to keep in mind a little bit here is also that when these types of shocks happen, a bit like when COVID happened, right? When these types of sort of shocks happen, markets fall off a cliff, COVID, all that kind of thing. A lot of VCs go, oh, okay, first thing I've got to do is stabilize my own portfolio. And so there's a little bit here of where there sort of is this natural, I guess, reset a little bit, because a lot of the time, particularly larger funds and larger things like that, they go, oh, okay, I've got to make sure I look after my portfolio first and foremost. And that may mean that, for example, they're saying to themselves, well, I'm going to actually reserve a bit more cash, knowing that way I can bridge some of my companies through this period in case they can't find an investor who'll be able to give them, more money to be able to get to the next threshold.
Yeah.
And so they're holding back, I guess, a little bit from the new deals and, things like that as a result of the fact that they're focusing on their existing portfolio, which
That's right.
I appreciate doesn't necessarily help a company that isn't in that position, but that's kind of why that's the behavior that is rational for the VC, perhaps not rational for the company that hasn't done it, but it's rational for the VC to behave in that way because of the degree to which they want to make sure that, they can kind of help their companies get through this period.
That's right. Just following up on that, I would also encourage founders to ask the VCs where they're at in their investing cycle, because especially when the markets are down, some VCs are at the end of their funds and they naturally will think about newer companies very differently to some firms that have just announced a new fund, in which case they're kind of like going out there and they've got to make a lot of investments in a short period of time. So keep that in mind, understand kind of where the headspace of your investor is, and there's nothing wrong with asking them that too. It's like a taboo question or anything at all. In fact, I would say it's a very good diligence question to ask any investor you talk to. All right, let's go on to our new section, which is Roast My Deck.
Oh, great.
I'm hoping to put like some big titles on that.
Where's the little, you're next to
little air horn. I did add the little air horn or something.
Maybe that's what I need to do. Is I'll need to get one of those little the radio panel things so I can.
Yeah. All right. So we are going to go through some decks. They are unseen by Hugh over here. I have only flicked through them to make sure there's nothing too offensive, but I haven't really read them at all. So we're really going to get our first reaction. These founders have given us the okay to do this so that we're not choosing some random person. And the whole purpose of this was really to give you an idea of how VCs react, with the caveat that investment decisions are not made off a pitch deck. They are just the intro you get, the foot in the door aspect. And obviously anything that can help founders get better pitch decks will hopefully increase their chances of foot in the door and having real conversations with investors, which is better for everyone. So without ado, let's dive into it. So first deck we'll start now is Elephants. It's a social goals app. We'll just react slide by slide. And we'll flick through this pretty quickly. So we're not going to go too detailed, but great. So I'll say first thing, intro page, good. I know it's a social app. I know it does something, maybe TikTok-y. Don't know about the name. That's a bit odd, but whatever. We kind of ignore the names anyway.
Yeah. No. My comment. I get to reply.
Sorry.
I think the first thing I think here is I've seen a lot of these decks. And I go, what is it about this one that's going to somehow be able to unlock this whole social goals thing that all the other companies have not? That's what this first page says to me. Is I go, interested. I'm curious to see how this company is going to try and address this problem, given no one else has been able to do it.
Okay, second slide is a team slide. Repeat founders, ex-Google, ex-Better. I really like it. If it's a strong team, I 100% put your team slide first, because I think it can help set authority and let people pay attention within the first 10 seconds. What do you think, Hugh?
Look, I'm on the record for not really liking the whole ex-Google, ex-Meta thing, but that, again, that's one of those pieces of religion. I think for me, with these sort of team things, I go, okay, cool. Can you ship stuff? And let's look, it looks like they can ship stuff, Yeah. And then secondly, what is their unique approach to this? How is it an experience piece? Is it and that this slide doesn't really say that to me. It doesn't really say to me Vito was a PM at Google on the something that is goals related, on the Tasks product or, whatever. some kind of model where I would go, oh, okay, so like, or, he was a UX researcher at Meta looking at, I don't know, behavior change.
Yeah, I agree. So when you are talking about your background and experience, it's not a long bio. Pick out the things that are unique to you that add to the narrative of why you're the right person to be solving this problem. But overall, I think it's not bad. Okay, dive into slide 3.
Look, I mean, everyone talks about, like, every generation likes goals, challenges, and productivity.
Yeah.
I don't know. This to me isn't like, oh, it's unique to millennials or Gen Z. Like, I don't know.
When I first saw this, the first thing I was thinking about was like notifications on social media. But then I was like, I don't know, productivity, challenges, maybe. Okay, slide 4.
I mean, this is one of those things of where it's like, oh yes, this is a fact of life, right? It's like it's boring. Yeah. I'm like, okay, sure. You don't need to tell me that because I already sort of know it.
Goals are hard to do by yourself. Slide 5. I might just read out the headline here. We're fixing the problem and growing the trend.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me as a header.
No, it doesn't make any sense to me.
It doesn't give me a key message. It doesn't teach me.
Fun pro tip, and if anyone watches my TikTok, you'll also hear this a lot, which is I do like the fact that you don't have to say problem or solution on slides. I much prefer you have a lead-in title, which is a core point you're trying to make across is the title of the slide.
Yeah.
So it means you can glance at it and you've gotten the core idea without needing to dive into any detail. I think
in theory,
really
the McKinseyism is like, you put the summary of the slide as the first little tiny middle header thing, and then you fill the slide with all the other shit in. But coming back up for 1 second, I think my follow on to that is the text underneath. That looks to me like it would be much better as a bullet point list rather than sentences, because sentences is very hard for me to read. So there's a bit of like, designy bit there.
True.
And then the other part of me goes, okay, cool. We've got group, like group chats, leaderboards, streaks. I'm like, okay, cool. Like they've got some of the core like behavior change things where I'm like, okay, cool. Like it's got behavior change.
Yeah, I would say that I find it better not to put tons of screenshots on your deck on one slide, but to actually explain what's happening on your mock-up or screenshots of the app on a per slide, or put it to like, the more you can focus us to one point on one slide, the better it will flow, and the faster we'll scroll through this and get the sense of what you're trying to say. Okay, next slide. Slide 6. I don't really get this.
It's meant to be a Venn diagram.
Is it?
Yeah.
It looks like a bunch of logos that I don't understand how they fit together.
I think it's hard to make it look like a Venn diagram with not using circles. I think if you use circles, people will instantly get that you're trying to make it a Venn diagram more.
There is like very light coloring, which is perhaps the contrast is not quite there, but okay.
I wonder though how much this is just a repeat of what we've already dealt with.
Yeah, true.
It's saying, cool, okay, it's a social goals app. Okay, so cool, social plus goals. It just says social plus goals again.
All right, slide 7. Okay, this is meant to be testimonials. I generally like testimonials, but I don't know if I quite like the way they've done it here.
Yeah, this still like, I think what confuses me here is like the design layout makes me go, oh, is this still like, are we looking at screenshots from the application? Are we not looking at screenshots from the application? Like in some ways with these things, I almost rather the scenarios where it's like, it's just like a crappy collection of screenshots that clearly have been taken from, the company's Apple Store listing or whatever. Because then I can go, oh, okay, so this is like, I recognize this is like an Apple Store, review or whatever it is, like I think there's a piece there of where maybe there's over design here because it's not immediately obvious to me what we do.
Yeah.
Like I sort of go, okay, like, I don't know, like reading the actual feedback pieces, I go, oh, okay, like, cool. It still doesn't, I don't know if it says pumped to me. It says they're like, oh yeah, this would be cool. It doesn't say like, holy shit, I would, drop my entire life to be able to use this thing.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I say if you're going to put testimonials, put strong testimonials. Yeah. Okay, next slide 8. How many more slides are there? There's only 3 more. That's fine.
Good. So I like the fact that it's like, okay, what's the business model for it? Everyone hates advertising as a business model, even though, ironically, Google, Facebook, they've done pretty okay out of advertising.
Well, I would say they hate it. I just said it's generally not an applicable early business model for startups just getting going, right?
like, I think, do I think $500 million a year worth of people purchasing coins and custom icons? Oh, that's going to be rough,
Yeah, I agree on that part.
Could I see you doing this as a thing that has a, $1.99 a month subscription? Yeah, absolutely. Can I see you doing that for 1 billion people? Probably not.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
again, I appreciate the piece of it. The slide says to me, hey, they understand that they need to work out a way to monetize this. I would almost say up front, it's potentially the thing where it's more like, look, like I would be saying this as there are lots of ways we could monetize this. Hey, coaching, SaaS, advertising, rah, 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 like you don't need to try and quantify it because they're not really quantifiable because you don't really know what the willingness to pay is for SaaS or coaching or whatever. You don't know any of the willingness to pay at all here. You're just going, oh, we intend for this to be a big business.
Yeah, I somewhat agree. I would perhaps say if you're a consumer app and you're planning on charging your users, all you have to do is be like, we reasonably have a goal to get to this volume of users, which equals this much per month, which therefore means that our business will make this much on an annual basis. That's the fine assumption to say, I'm very happy to have a discussion off the back of that. But what we're trying to look for here is really, is there a potential business model and can it grow very large, right? Is there a big enough market size? And finally, another team slide. No, this is a vision slide. It's go time. I don't know what slide this is. Maybe this is like a timeline slide.
Yeah, this one I'm sort of like, what are we? I think it's a timeline slide.
Yeah, I think it's a timeline slide. I will just say quickly, I highly recommend everyone to finish on an ask. So your second last slide before you have your logo and your contact details is have an ask, because in the end I'm a VC and I want to know what you want from me, right? And
but this piece here of like, cool, we have 330K US committed. Now, when you then say we're raising on a rolling post money val safe, I'm like, okay, cool, but that just says to me you're just dripping and dripping like little bits of money into the company. So I'm sort of like, what? How much money do you really need to be able to get? Like venture is all about like how do we get from where we are now to the next kind of threshold? And so I'm like, okay, tell me two things. One, what is the next threshold? Is that we want to launch the app, we want to get the first 1 million users, whatever it is. Tell me the next threshold and tell me how much money you need to get there and how much you have committed.
Yeah,
so if it's like, we've got 330 committed, we want up to 1 million on these terms, but we need at least 200, great.
Yeah, I agree. I'd also say the other thing that says to me is you couldn't raise a round. So therefore you would try to raise on a rolling basis. Now that might be true, but I wouldn't necessarily put that as your pitch for investors. I'd probably keep that as a secondary thing. I agree. I want to know how much you want to raise, what the goal is, not that you want to just keep adding money.
Well, and I just want to be confident. I want to be confident and know that you've sort of thought through this piece of how much money do I need to get the next thing.
Correct.
So good slides. Like again, when it's very easy to sit here and critique these things, but I hope that was helpful. And it's actually quite a good deck.
Okay, what would you rank it out of 10?
I don't know. I don't rank the decks out of 10.
Okay. What's your summary?
Okay, would I have a follow-up call with this company? It still hasn't really. So remember at the very start when I was like, what's the thing that's going to make this company unlock the social goals piece? Hasn't really addressed that.
I agree. It's a bit iffy. I'm not too sure if there's any difference with other productivity apps other than they're going to add social. And I'm like,
I also don't really know. Is this like, are we looking at like just designs that have been designed up in Figma by an agency, or are we looking at something that's actually been built already?
Yeah,
there's not really anything here that also says like we're already live or we're we're at the design phase. I think it might have been in that timeline slide, but it wasn't sufficiently obvious to me.
Yeah, I agree on that part. Cool. So for me, I would say it's not bad. I would definitely have a think about whether I should do a call, but I think at the same time, I'm not seeing a huge screaming out, this is why we're unique. And also, separate note, productivity apps are very, very difficult for VCs to fund because they're just very fickle markets and people love to switch productivity apps a lot. So there's no stickiness with a lot of them, but that's a whole separate conversation. All right, let's go to deck 2. So we're going to kick off deck 2. It is Story. The company is Story. It is Bring Imagine to life.
Great. This tells me almost, one, I hate DocSend. VCs all had DocSend. 2, this tells me almost nothing as to what you do. I mean, like I could squint at it. So my initial response is, oh, maybe this is like a generative art thing.
Yep. Okay, let's go to Teep slide first again.
Sure. Okay, so it's games. I get we're in games. I don't like having like one actual person and two advisors. Like, I don't know. I don't like advisors in decks. Like, I think advisors can be useful sometimes, but like there's advisor, they've agreed for me to stick them on the deck, but I talk to them once a year, and there's advisor like they're in the office every week, and the two are very, very different. And so that's why I just I discount any time an early stage company talks about advisors or like boards or whatever it is. I'm like, I just ignore all of that.
Yeah, I agree. I would say advisors don't give a lot of weight to your deck. So for founders who are trying to make themselves look, more impressive, don't use 10 advisors as the way to do it. It's an opposite effect. So the more advisor you have, the less impressive you look. But in this case, I'm going to just guess that it's a sole founder operation. Yeah. Hence why it's just advisors. So yeah. Okay, story shaped soul, slide 3.
Yeah, I mean, again, this doesn't really help. Like, I'm like, this is where it's sort of like, from my perspective, again, this is a bit of religion, but like, I don't really believe in needing to say these things that people are like, oh yeah, like stories. People like stories. I'm like, okay, cool. You don't need, at least it doesn't have 25, references on the slide to try and tell me that as well. Like, I'm like,
yeah. Harvard Business Review suggests.
Yeah. So,
but creating new stories is tough. Is it?
I mean, well, so in the game context, I guess you could say maybe.
Yeah, I guess like
it's a game. I'm applying back to the piece of like, oh, okay, now it looks like we could be talking about games. Okay, cool. So it's difficult to create, but I think it's not hard to like. There's an art to it, and I think that's where I'm curious. This makes me go, how are they solving for the art problem here? Because it's not all necessarily an implementation issue, which is what it's time consuming to make whatever it is. It's also there's an art piece because you can have a great game with some really interesting quest, dialogue, encounters, decisions, and lore. But if it doesn't all sort of like make sense and gel together, the game doesn't work.
Correct. Next slide, 5. Games are getting bigger every year. I mean, sure. Again, I'll put this in the obvious, like, no-brainer. Sure, it is.
Yeah.
Game market, big.
But like, games are getting bigger. Yeah, I mean, I'd also.
I think it means dialogue in this case.
Yeah,
lines of dialogue, right? I would say your title probably needs to be a bit more specific in terms of because if you think about the story, there's probably other ways to show how big a problem creating stories in games are. If you look at AAA games, like you've mentioned here, like the teams and the people involved are insanely big, right? They're bigger than movie productions. It's insane. Okay, story supercharges story creation. That's with story super. Okay, sure.
Yeah. So I mean, the problem with companies that have the name that's like the adjective is like you get some really weird titles like this, which you have to just navigate. But it's pretty weird.
I look bullet points. Okay, good. Simple title.
So the net here is so now finally I'm like, okay, so this is what they're actually trying to do.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, so they're pretty much just going, we're going to use LLMs to write lore.
Yeah. So
cool.
Religion point as well. You're where at slide 6 of 14. Don't get to the middle of your deck and tell me what you do. Really? Tell me what you do with the first 2 slides. Please, we don't need to know that games are big. We don't need to know that stories are important.
And you can, for people who you think might not know that stories are important or games are big or whatever, you can you can have an appendix at the end that's here's why games are big. And that way people who need to learn that, they can.
Yeah, but if you're sending this to a VC and they don't know games are big, maybe you shouldn't be trying to get money out of them.
Now, this I don't like. Well, this I go, right? And the reason I go, is I'm kind of like, okay, so you're kind of saying we're going to build a Kickstarter for storyline.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but isn't this already Kickstarter?
Yeah, I'm not sure I get what they're trying to go with this.
Yeah. This kind of reads to me like, oh, look, you can publish what you're planning on doing and people can filled and build an audience and things. So I'm like, yeah, but isn't that Kickstarter? Haven't you
Well,
already
I
got
would
that?
say this is now moving away from a business tool to like a consumer tool or something. I'm confused now.
Yeah,
Okay.
like the last thing said to me SaaS, and that then said to me like Kickstarter. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Okay, let's look at slide 8. We've proven we can create and scale stories. 100,000 views. Deep Learning Dragons. Okay. So this is a traction thing. I think this is what they've created using whatever tech they have. I haven't actually watched the video, but I did see clips of it at an AI meetup recently.
Okay.
Disclosure. So
I mean, this doesn't really make. Part of me is like, okay, so you made an animated webcomic and you got a whole lot of views. Congratulations, that's really exciting. It doesn't really say to me. It doesn't say to me why why this company is like how have you used your product to do this?
Yeah. I'm not too sure how that is. I think it's meant to be a demonstration of the concept, but you probably need to position it slightly differently if you're gonna show that. But like, does it say much to me? I don't know. And they didn't actually talk about. Sorry, I'm just skipping through a few slides. I don't think they've actually talked about how they did it, which is that process, which I think is more interesting here because that's kind of like what they're trying to build in the software.
Yeah, because it's like if this was like, oh, we did this, but this was off essentially a one sentence prompt, I'd be like, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting.
Correct.
Yeah.
That'd be very interesting, actually.
But like, we did this, and it took us 6 weeks, and I drew each of the comic frames by hand on my iPad.
Also, slightly controversial view, and this is like I guess where your benchmark is. 100,000 views to me is not a lot of views.
I mean, I would also say it's very easy to buy 100,000 views, but
true.
Very easy to buy a million views, I guess, on YouTube.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I love 100,000 listeners on our podcast, but like when I'm getting pitched from startups,
I'm looking forward to your 100,000 view, Galileo podcast.
That's right. Okay, next slide 9.
I don't know. These partnership things, I'm kind of like, whatever.
I agree. So we'll skip over that. Okay, business model slide 10.
Okay, but this looks like you're kind of building a feature for gamers, as in GAMURS gamers.
Yeah, I'm not too sure now. I'd be just confused about what you're actually building.
Yeah.
Okay, but I get that you've got a few tiers. There's a free tier. Cool. But like, who honestly is going to create a free? Like, who's going to use that? Okay, now market size video, size 11.
Mobile RPG gamers and creators first. I mean, it doesn't really. I don't know. This one doesn't really help me a lot.
No, because I still don't know who you're targeting.
Yeah, I don't like. I think in that one, I'm kind of like, explain to me more about mobile RPG gamers and creators, who they are, what that means, everything else. You don't need to say to me like, gaming, it's a big market. But like, what is it about this market that makes it like? Tell me about your niche. Tell me about like what you've decided the pointy end of your wedge looks like, and help me understand why it is that you're an expert in understanding this market.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Competition 4x4 needed in every deck. 4x4.
I mean, I
don't get it. I get what he's trying to say, but I don't think this is like. Is this it? Yeah, So first of all, AI asset creation for games and whatever you might want to call it, narrative creation. I think there's a bit of. I'm not sure that creatives and game designers, like good ones, are going to give up their creative control to a prompt.
Yeah, like if you said to me, "Oh, we're the platform that allows you to build NPCs that are much better to interact with," I'll be like, "Yeah, sweet, okay, cool." Like if I'm making a big game and I want to build a whole lot of NPCs, great. Like I don't want to have pay 25 designers to design like the character that stands in the background and what they do. Like, I get that, but I guess that's kind of different to saying what the actual core. And I mean, I'm not a game designer, so that's my caveat on that is like I couldn't tell you without sort of talking to some game designers to really understand how much of this sort of stuff is really interesting to them or not.
Yeah, I mean, based on I guess we've invested in a game and we've spoken to a few game startups, based on our conversations with some of these builders and game designers, I would say I think as a assistant tool to helping you create worlds, I'm very interested in that aspect. But as a replacement tool to replace the game artists and game designers, I'm not bullish on that aspect.
Well, just the brainstorming tool, great. That's what LLMs, coming back to our piece at the start. LLMs are really good at brainstorming.
Yeah.
Give me 10 subject line ideas. Like they're really good for that.
Side note, have you seen the Unreal Engine demo, the latest Unreal Engine demo that got released last week?
No.
Incredible video. It's an amazing how much better the lighting is. I mean, if you want to talk about LLMs in that context or AI in that context, it generates the world as you go through, and it's incredible to watch. That I find really fascinating. It generates it within parameters and profiles and certain aspects. You can tweak how it does that, but I find that absolutely mind-boggling. It's really interesting. That's going to have a big turn. All right, go on to the last slide. So second last slide.
Raising 500 grand.
Cool.
Committed. Cool. Congrats.
Great.
I like the structure here of going 500 grand, 60% verbally committed. I'm like, okay, sure. So it's kind of notional, soft commit.
Yeah.
18 months runway.
Yeah. Like it.
What doesn't help me here is the end of that in to build product. Of course. What else are you doing? You're an early stage company. You don't need to tell me you're building product. Right?
I like the for an R slide. I like the format of how much are you raising or what are you asking for? What are you going to spend it on? And then where will you be once you spent that money?
What I'd like to see here is those two pieces of saying, okay, so it's 18 months, 60%, 500,000. Show me the pie chart of the here's what we're expecting to spend it on, because that's where I can go. You talk about this scale up a distribution, and if I see 80% of that pie chart says advertising, I go, ooh, that's a bit of a worry at this stage. But if 10% of that is advertising, I go, oh yeah, great, sure, that seems sensible. And as James said, then give us 18 months runway to achieve what?
Yeah.
Scaling up a distribution isn't an achievement. It's it's going to be 10,000 users, 20,000 stories made.
Correct. And this is, I would say, for a lot of founders, my advice is they often forget this part, which is we're not investing in you to spend the money to build stuff, right? That's a given.
Yeah.
What we want to know is why are you more valuable once you've spent the money? AKA, what are you going to achieve, right? And so if you're going to spend $500,000 to get 10 million users, as an insane example, but sometimes happens, that's amazing, right? Obviously, I have a lot more questions around how that's going to work, but just to give you a hypothetical example. Okay, thank you. Cool. Contact. Fine. All right. So those are the two slides. Those are the slides for story. What do you think overall?
To me, and sometimes you read a deck as a VC and you're like, I don't get it. And I'm not sure if I don't get it because I just don't really understand. I'm not really sufficiently intimately understanding and knowledgeable of the space, or the deck just doesn't explain it well enough. And I don't really know, this doesn't really help me understand what they're really doing, who they're targeting, what the product's going to look like. And maybe that's because the founder doesn't know yet, and it still is very, very, very early stage. And you see that sometimes, but it's really hard when I don't really know that much about this space, let alone mobile role-playing game users. It's not a space I'm particularly familiar with. And so I just don't quite get it.
Yeah.
And that's a tricky thing to obviously you want to try and minimize that without having to sort of explain all of the minutiae to a person who is an expert and who understands it. But this one's one of those ones where I'm like, I'm not sure what I'm missing here. I'm clearly missing something. I don't quite understand, and I'm not sure if it's me or the deck.
Yeah. I broadly agree. I think the way that comes across to me is it is a conceptual product idea right now. I think it's great to get some angel funding. As a venture fund, would we back it? Hard to see how, because you haven't really described what exactly the customer is and what the product and solution is. But I am kind of intrigued to follow along to see what happens. So thanks very much for that deck, Nilu. And thanks very much to Elephants, who was the first deck. Thank you. Those are our first two startups on Roast My Deck. Hit the button. If you'd like to have your deck featured in the next podcast, please send it through on Twitter DM or send it to team@galileo.ventures, and we will try and include it in the next section of Roast My Deck. That brings us to really the end of the podcast. I just have one more question for you here, which is a founder question. We have a question from one of our portfolio founders, which is how are we sifting between the very bullshit fast follow startups with an AI focus, aka people integrating into GPT and being like, "Oh, we're magical AI," and the more legitimate, interesting companies in this space.
So my view on that is one, team. So like I think if you're building an AI company, you're going to have some pretty serious AI chop people inside the team.
Yeah, right.
So part one is team. If I see those sort of decks where it's like, but where's the like PhD machine learning crazy person in this? And there's no PhD crazy machine learning person. I go, oh, okay. So this is much more of an off the shelf thing. Secondly is like that piece of, I think we talked about it last time. Like I think if it's an AI company and that's a differentiation, it probably shouldn't be purely off the shelf, or it should be very heavily customized off the shelf type solution. The ones where it's like, oh, we're making a thing that helps you write blogs faster. I'm like, there's already 700,000 of those things, and they all use the OpenAI backend, and they all produce roughly the same results, and they all just pay the same, rent essentially to OpenAI, and there's no real differentiation.
Yeah, that's right. And it's super hard to know where the value is going to accrue in that space. There are a couple of big early movers that have made a lot of headway. I think we mentioned it before, like Jasper AI. But even then, I mean, I'm sure the Jasper AI executive team are wondering where this is all going to land, and how much of their lunch is going to get eaten by other services from Google and Microsoft as well. So I think in that aspect, totally agree. I would say for founders, early stage founders that are looking to integrate AI into their product, I would say absolutely go for it. If it can increase your user experience and increase convenience and increase time to value, I'll just call it that, then absolutely think about it and absolutely experiment with it. Should you pivot yourself and present yourself as an AI startup? That's the part where I'm like, think about what your core IP is. What is your core product? What's the solution you're actually building? And what helps you build your competitive moat over time? Because the OpenAI model will keep getting better. And maybe in the future, you'll use a different language model. But like, I wouldn't just suddenly go, I'm an AI startup just because I have an API integration. That's kind of like saying you're a cloud startup because you use AWS.
Yeah.
Which is obviously not.
And I think that's probably a good analogy in that it's like ultimately a lot of this stuff is probably going to end up being commoditized in the way that cloud is now commoditized.
Yes.
And everyone has cloud somewhere, everyone's got some cloud somewhere in their software when they're a software company. Everyone's got a little bit of cloud. And that's not necessarily, yes, it's an advantage because not having the cloud would make you slower or worse, but everyone kind of has the same advantage.
Yes, correct. Great. All right. Well, that is the end of our podcast. Thanks everyone for listening to the second episode. Send through your thoughts, comments, criticisms, disagreements. We love to chat.
Criticisms only to James, please.
Compliments to Hugh. And we will see everyone here. Oh, and of course, like, comment, subscribe, etc. On whatever you're listening to this. And we will see everyone here for episode 2 soon.
Episode 3.
Episode 3. See you later.